Welcome to this edition of Toolbox Tutorials.
In this video we're going to be talking about creating conscious incompetence. I'm sure you've encountered people who are blissfully unaware of their inability or their lack of skill, and they're really difficult to train. It can be very frustrating. You're probably already aware of the Conscious Competence Learning Model. Essentially there are 4 stages. Everybody goes through all 4 stages when they're learning. They start off at unconsciously incompetent. They then move through to consciously incompetent, consciously competent, and unconsciously competent. So as an example, when you're learning to drive, before you get into the driver's seat, you are blissfully unaware of just how complicated it can be. And then you go out on your first driving lesson and you'll suddenly become conscious of all the things that you don't know. How to change gear, that clutch control, looking in the mirror, all of those things, and it seems almost overwhelming. You then get to that point when you've gone through your lessons and you're ready to take your driving test and you are consciously competent. So you might have passed your test, but you're having to really stop and think at every stage about what you're doing. You cannot be tuning the radio or talking to your fellow passenger when you're driving along. You have to really concentrate. And then you get to a point where you are completely unconsciously competent. You get in the car in the morning, you start it up, you pull away, and you don't even really think about it. Now, it's not actually possible to jump stages. Everybody needs to go through all 4 stages to get to that point where they're unconsciously competent. But when I'm working with my clients to develop their management skills, training skills, or customer service skills, there's often an assumption that people are already at stage 2, that they're already consciously incompetent. In other words, it's assumed that they already recognise any shortfalls and need for their development. But sadly, they're often still at stage 1. They're unconsciously incompetent. So they're not yet aware of any need to develop their skill or their behaviour. And trying to teach someone from this point is the reason that a lot of training fails. You see, for someone to learn something new or to change their behaviour, there's got to be some motivation to do so. And particularly when that requires some effort on their part. And without that recognition, they're pretty unlikely to be receptive to learning, and the barriers are going to go up and they're going to be thinking, this doesn't apply to me. In some instances, people may previously have been at other levels, but they've regressed back to being unconsciously incompetent over a period of time. So, for example, someone might already have got to a point where they're consciously incompetent, but they've simply forgotten what's involved. Or from consciously competent, they have just got rusty through lack of practice. Or from a position of unconscious competence, they've been doing it for so long that they've now picked up a number of bad habits. So thinking back to our driving analogy, many of us, I'm quite sure, and I know that I'll put my hands up and say that I'm probably one of those people, we've picked up bad habits, and if we were to take our driving test again today, we probably wouldn't do that well. Undoing somebody's bad habit can often be a lot harder than starting again completely from scratch, particularly if somebody thinks that they're doing a good job, because let's face it, whoever likes to be criticised for something that they're already doing? So how do you move someone from being unconsciously incompetent to becoming conscious of their incompetence? Well, one way potentially of doing this is waiting until something goes wrong. But of course, that could be quite risky, particularly if it's a service issue. You don't really want to wait until a customer complains or you have an unhappy customer. If it's a manager, you don't really want to wait until they're not getting the results that you want. So what's the alternative? Well, if we start by thinking about what's the outcome or the standard that's needed, it's a lot easier for us and probably for the employee as well to recognise when they're falling short. Of course, we can't assume that when the standard's not being reached, it's just purely because of a training need. It could be other things like resources, time, mixed messages, but let's assume for the sake of this exercise that it is a training need. The next thing we need to do is to ensure that not only do we recognise it, but the employee recognises it as well. So we need to give them some feedback. But just recognising that they have a training need isn't necessarily enough to motivate them into wanting to do something about it. And that motivation so often is sold to them on the basis of it's a benefit to the business rather than to the individual. But actually we need to get into their shoes and think about it. Okay, if I was in their shoes, what would be in it for me to learn this new skill or this behaviour? For example, saving me some time, making the job more enjoyable, getting fewer complaints, helping me on my career path, just something that's a personal benefit. The better the person understands the training need prior to any tuition or coaching or training, the more enthusiastic they're going to be even to turn up for that training in the first place. And the greater the awareness or consciousness of their incompetence, the more receptive that they're likely to be to any learning, development or change. And the quicker you're going to get them to move up that ladder from a position of unconscious incompetent right the way through to unconsciously competent. So having moved now from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent, in the next video we'll go on to talk about how to move from consciously incompetent to consciously competent. If you found this video tutorial useful and you'd like more information on how to get the best out of your customer service training, then head on over to my website and download my free guide on 7 reasons why customer service training so often fails and how to get your customer service training delivering some real results. Go to www.naturallylaw.com/CST.